Good evening, everybody. It's 9:36 on the East Coast, 6:36 on the West Coast. On a Monday, it must mean it's time for your slightly late weekly Calamity Jane livestream. James, how are you doing on this somewhat belated start to the weekly stream?
I'm doing just fine. I happened to run some technical issues before we started. My Mac decided to restart, and my virtual drive was disconnected as a result. So, had to do some gum and shoestring fixing to get my Mac to work. And here we are. We're good.
Lovely, lovely. How many marshmallows did it take before the
Oh,
Mac
it's all
finally?
yeah. It's just the Hubba Bubba. That's the old school '80s bubble gum. I had to use on this one. It was pretty bad.
Okay, all
Um,
right.
Patched some things up, but
Which
we're all good now
which
for
city
today.
or region of California is Mac on now?
Um, Oh, I didn't even want to look. I didn't even bother checking because why? I know I'll open it up and it's gonna be. You know what? It's gonna be defaulted to Cupertino. Doesn't it always do that? I think
Well,
for all.
so you remember when Mac updates used to be different types of predatory cats,
Yeah,
snow
yeah,
leopard and
yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
and then they moved it to cities and regions of California.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I didn't even catch that because I just blank. I don't even bother looking at the name of them anymore. I just know it's an
Mm-hmm.
update. I don't know what I'm on because I remember there was a Yosemite for a while. There
Yosemite
was
and like
yeah,
a cruise or I don't know.
yeah.
There's like
I just gave up. I don't
yeah,
care.
yeah, yeah. I think it's hilarious. I mean, and I suspect that there's diehard fans who have a lot of investment in what is the name of the new update, right?
hmm
I am decidedly not one of them. Nor am I really one to judge, given the content of our weekly streams. But nonetheless, I think it's hilarious that they actually still name their updates beyond just simple numbers.
Yeah, it is a little odd. I do. I kind of. I mean, just for nostalgia sake, I do kind of miss the cat names a little bit. Then
Yeah.
I can associate certain bugs with each cat,
Yeah.
so I know the reason why. Now I just don't care.
No,
Um,
no. Yeah, I feel you.
yeah. But anyways, let me show you what we're working on tonight,
All right, sounds good.
and we'll go into what we want to talk about tonight. So I will share my screen, and as we do every week, we just go into discussing how discussing random stuff on in pop culture land while I animate random stuff on our episode of Calamity Jane. So this
Mm-hmm.
week I will be working on this pose of the Warhog and this front view, which I think I pretty much have with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much, I think that'll work. But there's gonna be a little bit more here to do. Where again, last week we just got done with this pose with Leon getting pushed into screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then this roar sequence here, I might try to do a couple of poses here. So side pose, which again I probably have with this guy here. Um, I could probably use that, but then I got
Mm-hmm.
to make him open his mouth real wide and roar like crazy. So we'll see where I get to tonight. But I'll be kind of doing some hodgepodging tonight, just like I did with my Mac. I'll be doing some hodgepodging with existing assets to see what I can get away with and what I need to draw that's new.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. I'm
Yeah,
excited to see the Warhog come even more alive as we
yeah.
progress over the course of this evening.
So now, as far as us talking about stuff, I mean, I have a couple of things I was going to talk to you about, but I'm not sure if you have something in mind. 'Cause sometimes, like after you're done with a game, for example, you're raving about it if you like it, or same. I guess you and I both, or we're hating on it. But for now, I do want to bring up, and I think I talked to you about this yesterday. You need to start watching Fargo for sure. It's a really good show.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And yeah, and this is not about just me wanting to be angry at it and have somebody to be angry with and yell at clouds at. This one is Fargo's always good. There's nothing negative I can say about it. It's just an excellent show.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's funny. I mentioned this to another friend that you were trying to get me to start Fargo, and he was like, "Yeah, you should definitely do that. Seasons 1 and 2 might be my two favorite seasons of television ever." And I'm like, "Whoa,
yeah,
those
you
are big
could make an argument
words."
for the
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you could make an argument for that. I mean, it's an excellent it's an excellent show. I mean, you can put it up there with I know you have your pantheon of shows like I guess Twin Peaks. I'm assuming is up right up there, and possibly X-Files because you're rewatching it again. I think for the upteenth time, right?
Yeah.
But Fargo deserves a shot at the top 10. I think of all-time great shows. It's such a and again, what's so remarkable about it is every season is special and they're standalone, but yet they have just enough of a through line to justify the name Fargo, um, the locale where it usually sort of takes place, where people are from that area. Yeah, I'm just watching season 4 because Amit and I we're watching season 5, but it's just on a cadence where they're trying to do the release schedule in a couple of weeks, whatever. Or release 2 episodes weekly or something. So we didn't finish season 4, so now we're watching season 4, and season 4 is amazing too. It's like God, they just never have any. There's not a mediocre season I could think of out of the bunch, out of the 5 seasons so far. Season 5 started out terrific. So yeah, so I'm kind of in a rave. I'm in a rave mood about Fargo for sure. So I don't know if you have Hulu, but I think it's the best.
I do. Yeah, I do have Hulu. So maybe I'll put one on here soon. I'm between episodes of the X-Files right now. Anyway, the next episode I'm on is a season 4 episode called Tempest Fugit, which is a 2-parter. The second episode of which is Max, and it ends a storyline that was started all the way back in season 1
that's pretty cool.
of the X-Files called Fallen Angel. A character named Max Fennig is been abducted multiple times, and for some reason an extraterrestrial force seems hell-bent on getting him back in that episode, and the military is involved and conspiracy ensues.
Okay.
And then season 4 brings him back briefly, mostly for a cameo. He's on an airplane that crashes, and Mulder and Scully are brought in to figure out why. And again, government conspiracies ensue, as is the case.
Yeah, always the case with the X-Files. They love doing that.
No, I love the X-Files. It is, by every measure of the word, a procedural, in that it has a consistent formula that it follows for every episode, and it's rare that it deviates from that formula. But the thing is that formula is extremely well executed, and it makes for, to this day, I mean, there are episodes that rival anything that is on television right now, in my opinion. And so it's been fun going back and revisiting that, and part of the reason why I rewatch some of these old shows is because you have memories associated.
Yeah.
With I remember when this came out. I remember I was doing this, or I was here, or this thing was happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And season 4 by this point, it was 1996. The Olympics were coming to Atlanta at this point. I was a freshman or sophomore in high school. I think a sophomore in high school. And there was a lot going on. It's interesting to, and we've talked about this at length on this podcast and other types of things. It's interesting to go revisit this show and shows like this as an adult, because you look at them with a completely different frame of reference, if not only just a larger vocabulary. I mean, there are things that I watch in this time around where it's just like, oh wow, I know what that means now, right? I remember because season 5 was in 96 or 97, and there was an episode in season 5 which is great, called The Postmodern Prometheus. I didn't know what the word postmodern and I didn't know who Prometheus was when I watched this show in 1996. And I'm jumping ahead of myself, obviously. I haven't gotten to this episode yet. But years later, as I learned things, and I learned what postmodernism was, and I discovered who Prometheus was, I got the joke. and the
Mm-hmm.
episode took on a completely different context for me because I wasn't watching it as some sort of a parody of Frankenstein. I was also watching it for the underlying social commentary that was just absolutely woven throughout the course of the episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting um, to do that. Even in the most sort of superficial ways, there's an episode in season 4 called El Mundo Gira, which is ostensibly about a strange enzyme that causes out of control growth of fungus, and two brothers are carrier for this fungus, but in reality is actually a subtle commentary on the nature of illegal immigration in the United States. And like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, this was way back in 1996. Who was like ballsy enough to do episodes with this kind of subtext? I mean, the answer is the X Files, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's interestingly, it's not political in as much as it tries to take a side on the issue. It more comes down on the reality that and obviously you have to watch it through the lens of 1996 America. I mean, the immigration situation in this country is the same but also very different somehow. But it doesn't try to make a commentary on good, bad, or whatever. It just says that the people who come to this country and manage to stay under the radar because they're forced to, they become sort of lost souls. They become
Mm-hmm.
aliens. Even they be the metaphorical ties is that they become aliens in practically a literal sense. They might as well be extraterrestrial because they're so foreign to whatever land that they're on, right?
Yeah.
And it was really cool. I mean, I remember watching that episode and kind of being meh, right, when I was a kid because I didn't really understand what the subtext was. But now watching it as an adult, is it the best episode of the X Files? No, but it has a whole different meaning to me because I have more context. I have a better understanding of politics and the way this country works, and et cetera, et cetera. And
Mm-hmm.
it was way more enjoyable as an adult than it was as a sophomore in high school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's really cool to see this show that had such an impact on me growing up, and then rewatching it through the eyes of an adult. And yeah, so anyway, it's if you haven't gone back and watched one of your favorite shows since you were a kid, I highly recommend doing it because you'll definitely get a different perspective on what it
Yeah.
means to you.
Yeah. Because now you yourself have a life perspective that's you kind of brought with you, and you're watching it again, and that's interesting because it sounds to me like what you're saying is the show holds up
Oh yeah.
for you, and now it's even actually more valuable to you in that regard. Like you have the nostalgia, and you're actually connecting different dots life wise with it, which is pretty cool. I think
hmm
there's very few shows that can kind of do that. It feels like you know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
No, I agree. I
yeah,
agree. I rewatched early this year. I rewatched Firefly,
uh,
and wow, that show, in my opinion, does not hold up. It is very much a product of the time, and if you can watch it within the context of what was considered cool in the early 2000s,
mhm.
um, then great, awesome, or early 2000s or late 90s. I'm trying to remember exactly when Firefly.
It was pretty close to yeah. I think it was early 2000s. I thought 2001 ish or something.
2002, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
if you can watch it through the context of what it was to be cool and edgy in 2002, then okay, you can still find some value in it, but it doesn't age well at all, right?
Wow.
The some of the dialogue is like, oh geez, some of the characterizations and the character archetypes are just not what we're looking for, I guess, in a
Mm-hmm.
contemporary society. And given what we know about how Joss Whedon treats his cast and his writing staff and on set now, it provides a little bit of unintentional context for why the show is the way it is. And so yeah.
So you're saying that like so the archetypes we're talking about like the space geisha type character that
Mm-hmm.
is a love interest for Mal, the hero captain of the show.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that some of that stuff was kind of an extension of Joss Whedon, but tame versus what he was doing on set to people behind the scenes, huh?
Yeah, it provides an unintentional look into what his frame of reference is, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I
what his
remember
attitude is. Yeah.
in the early 2000s, Joss Whedon, and I apologize, my sinuses are all stuffed up because it's all of a sudden the temperature has bottomed out here. It's gotten very cold again, and my sinuses are just. So I'm sorry if I sound a little weirdly nasally. But yeah, he was at the peak of his power at this point, right? He had come off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, an Angel, and this was his new thing. And he was a darling of geeks all over the place because he was considered very progressive, very female empowering and that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, that didn't bear out in the long run. And you watch Firefly, and it's hard to separate the art from the artist at times.
Yeah.
And this is one of those instances, now that it's sort of come out about how he operates. You look at that and you can't help yourself go, oh wow, I see a lot of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but just in general, the show isn't as cool. It trades so much off of its coolness that now that what it isn't cool anymore, the show limps. It kind of limps along, right? And the thing with the X-Files though is it never traded on what was cool, right?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't about being cool. It was about leaning into these conspiracies and that kind of stuff. And it ended up being very cool, and it ended up defining a lot of the 90s cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the show itself wasn't trading on that. And so with the X-Files, you can kind of laugh at the silly outfits that everybody's wearing in the early 90s and the awful haircuts that everybody has and the lack of cell phones and, the very early days of the internet.
Yeah, but that's kind of, I think that's what makes it
right.
The timing of it's endearing, kind of, like, oh
right.
yeah.
Right, and you strip away all of that sort of those anachronisms, and what's left is still this very compelling, interesting, valuable hour of television per episode, right?
Yeah.
And even though, and it is interesting too, that, and this is where I think my own personal bias is coming in, because I imagine that younger people who grew up in a post 9/11 world would watch the X-Files and go, well, this is really mundane and boring. Because it turns out a lot of the conspiracy theories as the X-Files talked about, at least on the government side of things, they were all true, right? And so I imagine that young people watch the show going, yeah, what is this, a documentary? I don't understand. Right? We know all of this. None of this is shocking anymore. But an old fogey like me, I could still watch it and be entertained, even though a lot of the conspiracies seem almost passé. Right, by today's standards. This isn't a pre 9/11, pre-Trump, pre-COVID, illegal drone strike world, right?
Well, you brought up an interesting. It brought up a question for me because you're saying that there was conspiracies that have been proven right. So, off the top of my head, I could think of "We're Not Alone" poster. So the whole UFO declassification stuff, that's been going on the past 5-6 years, roughly. They've been talking about it more.
Mm-hmm.
So it took them 25 plus years to acknowledge that one, right? What else is there that's a conspiracy theory that was actually... Because that's the one that was the biggest one for me whenever I watched the show.
Well, I mean...
aliens gonna...
Yeah, I mean...
do you know of any of that kind of...
I'm speaking more in terms of broad brush. The fact that when the X-Files came out, the public's trust in government institutions, for the most part, was still at least around 50%, right?
Sure, sure.
Government trust in institutions in 2023 is at like 5 or 6%, right?
Yeah.
One of them. I mean, I'm speaking strictly of the United States. I can't speak to any other country, but um, you know, so one of the things that was the most shocking about the X Files was this notion of the government as the villain, the government not working in the best interest of its population,
Hmm.
the government, in fact, using the population basically as chattel to achieve whatever aims that the people in power wanted to maintain, right? I mean, the
And
concept of the
to me,
Masons and the Illuminati, I mean, all that stuff has
yeah.
existed forever, but it was always very much fringe. And so the X
Yeah.
Files mainstreaming these very fringe ideas was cutting edge, right? But
Well,
now,
also what's interesting is how,
yeah,
to me, everything you just said was encapsulated with the Smoking Man
mm-hmm,
as
mm-hmm,
the cigarette smoking man guy. Like he was personification of evil government
mm-hmm,
conspiracy. Like they put a face on it on this ephemeral weird. You couldn't really. It wasn't. He made it tangible. Like
mm-hmm,
the writers for the X Files, like that's the guy. You need to be mad at that guy.
mm-hmm,
He represents every. It was really smart in
mm-hmm.
that way to do that. But anyway, sorry, it was
No, no,
one
no,
of
no. You're absolutely right. The cigarette smoking man, CGB Spender, um, was absolutely an intentional anchor point, right? He is the
yeah,
personification of the evils of an out of control, power hungry, corrupt government, right? And I've read a lot of interviews with Chris Carter, and when he created the X Files, he put Mulder and Scully in the FBI because he said that yes, there were all these issues, but he still believed in the general notion of the government being an agent of good to represent the people, right? And that's what Mulder and Scully represent.
mhm.
And as we, continue to go down this road in the 21st century, the X Files continues to feel more and more passe because more and more corruption, it seems, continues to be exposed at every level, both privately and publicly, right? People in power are doing really bad things, you know,
Mhm, mhm.
and um, and so you watch it, and it's no longer surprising at all that when you watch it that the government is the villain, right? It's just not shocking.
Yeah,
But in the 90s when it was on, it was shocking how villainous the X Files made people in power out to be. And I'm using the government a lot because they are the main villain. But I mean, the X Files, it talks about corporate corruption, and it talks about
yeah,
um, the ways in which private industry also uses its power to manipulate people and also control the government. And it was really really ahead of its time in that way, um,
mhm.
and very honestly predictive in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean it is fun to watch the X Files through that lens, whereas Firefly doesn't hold up in that same way. It doesn't maintain that sort of interest. It's
Yeah.
so completely just traded on its cool factor that when you watch it again, you have to look at it through the perspective of that era for it to really be entertaining.
Mhm.
So, anyway, big giant X Files soapbox that I completely took over the stream with.
Well, as you should. You're the X Files guy here,
Yeah,
so
yeah, wow.
I would expect nothing less than to hear a nice you waxing poetic about a really good show, all time great show. So
I mean, and
it's
interestingly,
cool.
it's one of the reasons why it failed when they brought it back, right? The
Yeah, that was my next question. Is because like it's funny how I still would rather just watch the first four seasons. So there's a couple of things here. The seasons with Mulder and Scully are great, and then when they were to me they were grasping at straws when they brought in Doggett and this other
Reyes,
side.
yeah,
Yeah. I just didn't care. I stopped
yeah,
caring after that. During the midst of its height and or watching it fall, witness its
mm-hmm,
fall. Then getting the movies back was great. It brought back some of the interest. But you knew that David Duchovny wasn't going to go back to doing the show regularly anymore. I think Julian Anderson, I bet, I'm just completely as a casual fan saying, I bet you she would have done the show on the regular, I think. But I think David Duchovny kind of had an ego or something, or he wanted to just do movies or something like that. That's what it felt like on the
Yeah,
outside.
that's absolutely true.
Yeah, it's too bad.
He just got tired of doing TV, tired, and wanted to try to start his movie career. And he attempted, and it didn't really make a huge splash in the movie space. And ultimately, like, found a niche in television, which, you know, good for him. Yeah, Gillian Anderson was a lot more willing to continue on with the show, which is why I think she was in it for all 9 seasons. Although by season 9, they were, you know, significantly phasing her out of the show, and if it had continued, it would have, like, I suspect the original season 10 would have just featured Doggett and Reyes, and I suspect Skinner would have stayed, but it would have just been Doggett and Reyes, and Scully would have been completely sunset by that point.
So, as a fan of the X-Files, what was your, like, are you looking at the Doggett and Reyes seasons as the X-Files can do no wrong, and I love that season too? Like, do you have blind devotion to those seasons, or are you able to take off your fan glasses and see a different perspective, or are you trying to be objective? Like, I don't know. I'm just curious. Like, what do you think about those last few?
Those last 2 seasons, I hated. 8 and 9, I did not care for at all. And I'm actually curious to rewatch them as an adult. Because one of the reasons that I hated him is because Mulder wasn't in it. Right?
Yep.
Mulder as a character was a very formative character for me growing up. Because in a lot of ways I grew up with the X-Files. You know, it premiered in 1993. I was 12 years old. And it went off the air in 2002 when I was 21 years old. You know, so I did go from a teenager to an adult over the course of that series run. And I had you know, as a kid, you get emotionally invested in things because you don't really fully have the context for other stuff. And I had an emotional investment in Mulder and Scully, and to see them sort of fade away from the show it felt like the show that I wanted. They were forcibly taking it away from me, right?
Yeah.
And obviously I didn't have the emotional articulation to understand that at the time, and I do now. And so I'm curious to go back and re-watch those later seasons and see if there's anything good in them at all, or, you know, and I was bagging on them because it didn't have Mulder and Scully, or if they were legitimately just not as good, you know?
Yeah.
So I am curious about that, but I'm still a ways away. I'm only about 2/3 of the way through season 4 right now, and, you know, that's a long way to go to season 8.
Yeah, and season 4 is great.
Season 3 and season 4 are the peak of the series.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It was magic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then season 5, you start seeing cracks a little bit, but it's still okay. And then,
yeah. I mean, I
don't know.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say I don't know when Doggett. So Doggett and Reyes show up at season 7 and 8. Is that what they do?
Doggett shows up in season 8. Reyes shows up as an occasional guest star about halfway through season 8, and then she becomes a primary character in season 9. You know?
Okay. All right. Huh.
And the other challenging thing too is that the archetypes that Scully and Mulder had were pretty perfectly balanced and really relevant to the show. You know, the believer and the skeptic.
Yep.
And the showrunners understood that they couldn't just do that again, and so they tried to form new archetypes for the protagonists, right? So it wasn't just strictly the skeptic and the believer. Doggett represented someone who was very grounded and pragmatic. And so it wasn't that he was a skeptic, it was just that he didn't have proof to change his point of view, right? And so that way he felt really malleable. He also the X-Files wasn't a passion for him, it was just a job.
Yeah.
And in that way, it also was far less exciting. And then, you know, Monica Reyes also came into the X-Files sort of, I don't remember how she came into it and became a permanent part of it. But again, her archetype was really muddy. It wasn't clear. She was the spiritual one, but spiritual in an almost uneducated, emotional way. You know, Mulder was the believer, but he was also brilliant. You know, he was an extremely successful and competent profiler. He had a great deal of success within the FBI before he got into the X-Files. Whereas Monica Reyes was very much just, she was kind of a spiritual entity, but didn't really have the chops to back up her belief, right? So she felt very ungrounded in a way that Mulder actually still was, despite his crazy belief systems.
And on top of that, I mean, yeah, the opposite with Gillian with Scully was she was Mulder's equal.
Yes.
It felt like, like they were pretty much, they're brilliant, and they were literally on the opposite sides of the same coin, and they were, it was so much fun to watch that dynamic too. Because she had instant credibility just as much as Mulder did. I don't remember how they established that in the first season, but it was so much fun to watch them going the back and forth.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, because neither Doggett or Reyes were intended to be these overeducated, busy brainiacs, their conversations weren't as interesting as Mulder and Scully's, and honestly, Robert Patrick and Annabeth Gish just did not have any chemistry whatsoever. Right? Yeah. And so, I mean, even as a teenager, a young adult looking at this, those are all things that I recognize, and I suspect will remain the same as I get to those latter seasons. But there was definitely, an emotional component of you're ruining my show, which obviously I don't have anymore, and so I'm curious to see if I can find sort of the diamond in the rough of those latter seasons.
I'm sure you might be able to find something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I gave up on the show for the most part. I'd watch an episode here and there, and they were just okay, but it's pretty much like what you said. The chemistry wasn't there for them, so it didn't hold my interest. Mm-hmm. The banter wasn't, their banter back and forth or their debates felt kind of empty. Mm-hmm. Like, didn't have as much skin in the game as Mulder and Scully did. And I think that was what was missing. But hey, they tried. And, what's funny is like, was it season 5 and 6 when they introduced Millennium with Frank Black and stuff? Is that when?
Yeah, so Millennium showed up around that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was another show that could, for me, what's funny is like after X-Files started kind of feeling kind of weird, I went over to Millennium for a while, and that was a lot more. I was scratching my itch in that way, even though it was just pretty much Frank Black and his monotone, but his gravelly voice was really cool. But he pretty much kind of started scratching that itch, but it was just too far over to into the occult side and not conspiracy as much. It was more like just watch out for the year 2000 kind of stuff, and like but it was great. It's another great show. I don't know where you feel like how that feels in the.
Well, that's also an extremely complicated conversation. I loved Millennium. I loved all 3 seasons of Millennium, and there's I believe season 6 or season 7 episode of the X-Files that sort of wraps up the storyline of Frank Black within the X-Files, because Fox canceled the show before they could wrap up the story. But honestly, it's a weird show because when Chris Carter created it, the impressions that Frank Black got were actually supposed to be sort of schizophrenic visions. They weren't prophetic, right?
Oh, okay.
And those schizophrenic visions did help him, and he was able to utilize them to accomplish his goals, but they weren't actually these sort of psychic prophecies that they became. For whatever reason, Chris Carter got distracted by a bunch of projects. He kickstarted a lot of series in that time. They did the very short-lived Lone Gunmen spin-off. And that and then there was this other sort of sci-fi VR military show that starred Terry O'Quinn that didn't go anywhere, and I don't even remember the name of it. That didn't go anywhere, but he was working on all of these, and he just was splitting his time so thin. Glenn Morgan and James Wong, who had come back to the X-Files after their show Space Above and Beyond, didn't take off after about 2 seasons or so. He promoted them to be showrunners of Millennium, and they went in a weird direction of it. They sort of dropped the notion of Frank Black having somewhat, almost schizophrenic visions, which allowed him to solve crimes, to saying, no, this is actually like these prophetic dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not only are they prophetic psychic insights into the killer, um, they are also a larger commentary on the nature of the coming apocalypse,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
completely changed the course of the show. I mean, Chris Carter was very clear that when he launched Millennium, it was not intended to be supernatural, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
visions were purely in Frank's head. That partly psychosis, partly his genius insight into profiling. Um, but James Wong and Glenn Morgan, they added the supernatural occult aspect to it, and got so crazy with it that not only did Chris Carter kind of disavow the show, but Fox was like, all right, it's canceled. And so knowing that it was canceled, Glenn Morgan and James Wong ended the second season with an apocalypse.
God, I didn't even know. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I kind of felt out of the timing with that show. I just remember enjoying the first season.
Yeah.
And I think I was in college at the time and stuff like that. I never got
Yeah.
around to watching it much after that. But I
Um,
really enjoyed it for what it was.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I still loved it. I mean, I loved all three seasons. Even though like what Morgan and Wong did, it basically they had a massive falling out with Chris Carter as a result.
Wow.
They left Millennium. They left the X Files. As far as I know, they never reconciled.
Huh.
So they brought Chris Carter back in, and they gave it a third season. And the first thing they had to do is like, how do we undo the apocalypse? And they managed, and season three was good, but it could never really get the momentum back, right?
Mhm.
And ultimately, Fox did cancel it after three seasons, and they had to sort of wrap up Frank Black's storyline in season six of the X Files. But man, this was a really deep dive into X Files and X Files adjacent lore.
And we're only an hour in. There's plenty more hours to go. I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah.
you know.
The funny thing is I don't even think Millennium is streaming anywhere. The X Files is on
Oh, that's a
Hulu.
shame.
Yeah, the X Files
Yeah.
is on Hulu, but I don't think Millennium is. Yes, it is not streaming anywhere. You can't even rent it right now from any service.
Wow.
It is for all I know completely memory hold, and it sucks because I used to have the complete series, the DVDs for the complete series, and when I moved out east, I did a massive purge, and the Millennium
Hmm.
series was one of the things that I purged. Same with the Lone Gunmen complete series collection, and I regret getting rid of both of those.
Wow. That's a shame. Because you kind of take for granted that, oh, it'll be on streaming. I don't have to keep hang on to
Mm-hmm.
this. I think that was it's the perfect rationale, especially in today's age. But now, I don't know. It seems like studios are consolidating, and now they're trying to pull things off of their streaming service so they can license them out to other places and then make more money. It's like kind of weird now. It's
Oh,
like,
and yeah, and this is the other. This is sort of and this is like completely changing the subject. But yeah, also so they don't have to pay royalties.
oh, really? I didn't know that part.
Yeah, apparently I was talking to some of my buddies who actually work in Hollywood, the industry, and they
Mm-hmm.
were saying, yeah, no, the reason why Max has been pulling a bunch of shows off of their streaming service is so that they don't have to pay royalties. If people can't watch them at all, they don't have to pay royalties.
What kind of a backward like? Don't you want your IP to be out there so people talk about it? Like, I don't understand that backwards
Well, they
thinking.
see. I
All
mean,
because
I
they want to save a
can.
penny.
If you look at it, yeah. If you look at it from the context of purely money, then it makes sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. But what you don't understand is like the potential to make more money is lost because then people don't talk about your stuff anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
stupid, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I
What a
don't. I don't
bizarre.
disagree. But I mean, they cancel these shows, right? So they're not making any new content. There's nothing to market. There's nothing to push, right? And the bits are taking up space on their server stacks, and
Yeah.
no one is watching them, but they're still occupying those bits. And so on the rare occasion that someone does watch them, they have to pay
Hmm.
royalties to the people involved, and it actually ends up being a net loss for them financially.
Huh.
And so it's
Wow.
easier just to pull them down entirely and completely memory hole them, so no one can see them, because it saves them money that way.
So if they license their stuff that's been memory hole to another streaming service, they don't pay royalties anymore. I don't see. I can't imagine that would
Well,
be
I
the
can't
way the
imagine. I
mechanism
mean,
works.
I don't know how the royalties infrastructure would work if they licensed it out. But yeah, I mean, almost
Hmm.
certainly they'd still have to pay some form of royalty. I mean, the
Yeah,
licensee
you
would have to
think.
pay Max, Warner Brothers,
Uh-huh.
and then Warner Brothers or whoever the licensee is would also have to pay the royalties that were negotiated when the show was produced.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but I mean, a show like I was speaking, with someone in specifically in reference to I think Raised by Wolves, right? Because
Hmm.
that's
Yeah.
Max pulled that off of their streaming platform entirely. You can't
Oh no!
yeah you
I
can't
was gonna
watch
watch
it.
season 2.
Yeah, it's gone. You can't watch it at all.
Unbelievable.
And yeah, that
Ah.
they were like, yeah, it's because it wasn't making them any money, and they didn't want to pay the royalties for whenever anybody saw it, and so they just completely took it off. And so now it's just gone. It's just completely gone. It was never released on Blu-ray, as far as I'm aware.
Oh my gosh, so annoying.
Yeah,
I wonder. Yeah, I'm curious if that's Max. I wonder if Disney's doing that. And the other, yeah, I think Disney is doing that.
I'm
They've
certain
already
that they
pulled off
are.
some of
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah. As far as I'm
yeah.
aware, they all
And
are. I know Netflix, like their very, very first streaming show, Lillehammer, which is about
mhm.
a mob guy who moved to
Yeah,
yeah
Mob
mob
Guy.
boss, yeah moved to what, Norway or something.
Yeah,
It's gone. It's
gone.
completely off of Netflix. You can't see it anywhere. It's as if it never existed.
I tried to watch a few episodes of that. It was just okay. I couldn't get
Mm-hmm.
into it myself, but Um, but then I know some. I had some friends that really like that show. But yeah, it's crazy. Um,
So
well,
yeah,
let's reserve Lone Gunman maybe for next week.
yeah, we can talk about
For
Lone Gunman some other time.
uh,
Another great show.
yeah. No, I'm very because I never watched it, so yeah, I'm very curious about that one. But
Super super bummed that one didn't find an audience, but it was really really good.
yeah, I'm sure it was because those characters were really funny.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was really curious if they were going to be able to hold their own show. But yeah, we'll talk about that next week.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to wrap up where we got to this week. But yeah, so this pose is I actually ended up redrawing it somewhat as we were
Okay.
talking. So I'm happy with this pose. Yep, there goes Leon off screen.
Oh, his hands are still
I,
green.
oh no! Oh, I thought I changed these. Let's see. Let me look at the master file. Yeah, they're changed here, so I got to update it. So that
Okay.
means Animate Flash just didn't. Yeah, their hands were right here. So
Yeah.
I'll re. I'll just have to re-import them again. But yeah, good catch. I'll take care of that. And then yes, we have that pose, and then I'm gonna go into the roar pose maybe next week.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that's
Cool.
where we're at.
Cool.
And then
Awesome.
yeah, it's in good shape for tonight.
Very cool. Yeah, we're right at about 45 minutes. I'd say that's a pretty good run. Um, but anyway, thanks for tuning in for this very X Files heavy episode. But we'll be back next week. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube to watch the stream. You can head over to calamityjane.rocks. That'll take you to our Patreon site. Please consider subscribing and helping us make this cartoon a reality. Also, you can check out our Instagram at calamityjanesalamander. We post links to the stream, and we have started a weekly post of art pieces with some nice little factoid blurbs about what each of the art pieces are. So start tuning into that every week. You'll get to see some thumbnails, some animatic pieces, some storyboard pieces, some concept art. And James will be doing the art, and I'm going to be writing a little bit of a blurb to provide context about what we're posting and why. So that goes up every Wednesday right now. Take a look out for that, and we're going to continue to populate Instagram with that. Uh, that is about it for me in terms of the plugs. So I will wrap up here and say good night, everybody. James, good night to you as well.
Good night.